I was driving late one afternoon, winding down a dirt road that seemed to dissolve into the forest, the trees pressing close on either side like they were trying to keep me out. The locals had given me vague warnings, hushed voices over beers, side-eyed glances, but I had to see it for myself. Something about the old stories had lodged in my mind, a gnawing curiosity that wouldn't let me turn back. The road was rough, ruts filled with water from a recent rain, and every mile I drove seemed to carry me deeper into silence. Then, through the blur of pine and shadow, I saw it, the first cabin. It was swallowed almost entirely by the trees, its wood blackened with age and weather, shingles missing, windows gaping like hollow eyes that watched me approach. Even from the car, I felt a weight settle in my chest, a tightness that made my breath come shallow and fast. I parked on the uneven shoulder and stepped out, the air immediately heavy and damp, smelling of mold and decayed leaves. The forest around me felt strangely still, like it had paused just for me to trespass. Each step crunching over the littered earth sounded deafening, and when I reached the cabin, I noticed that the door sagged on its hinges, slightly ajar, as though inviting me inside. My curiosity outweighed my caution, and I pushed the door open. The smell of rot hit me instantly, a musty, cloying scent that stuck in my throat. Dust motes danced in the weak shafts of sunlight cutting through broken windows. Old furniture leaned at odd angles, covered in decades of neglect, a chair collapsed near the hearth, a table bowing under the weight of nothing. Everything felt suspended in time, frozen the moment the family vanished, leaving the air thick with their absence. I wandered the cabin slowly, running my hand along the rough wooden walls. There was a diary on a side table, its leather cracked and pages brittle. I hesitated, then opened it, and the handwriting inside was neat at first, but gradually more frantic. It told of a family caught in a harsh winter, supplies dwindling, voices in the woods that weren't quite human, and the creeping sense that someone, or something, was watching them from just beyond the tree line. The last entry was smudged and almost unreadable, a frantic scrawl describing the shadows that follow, and a warning never to enter the cabin after dark. My heart thudded hard in my chest. I wanted to leave, but a part of me was rooted there, trapped by some invisible tether to this hollow place. I decided to stay the night. I set up a small sleeping bag near the fireplace, even though it was cold and smelled strongly of rot. Night fell, and with it, an oppressive silence descended. I thought I heard the wind shifting, but it carried strange sounds, voices almost whispering, pleading, unintelligible but urgent. Then came the footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate. One step, pause, another step. My rational mind told me it was the house settling, maybe an animal, but the rhythm felt deliberate, purposeful, like someone pacing deliberately above where I lay. Doors creaked, floors groaned, and I realized the cabin itself seemed alive, almost breathing around me. Shadows pooled unnaturally in the corners, shapes that shouldn't have been there, moving just at the edge of my vision. I dared not light a lantern, afraid of confirming whatever watched me. My breath quickened. My skin crawled. Every sound was amplified. The whisper of the wind through broken windows, the groan of timbers, the faint thud of something unseen. Hours passed like minutes, and sleep eluded me. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, that the diary and the stories had warped my mind, but then came the whispers from beneath the floorboards. Low, mournful, almost human, repeating over and over, "Don't leave! Don't leave!" I pressed my hands over my ears, closed my eyes, and tried to tell myself I would leave at first light. The sounds didn't stop. They ebbed and flowed like the tide, sometimes near, sometimes distant, but always present. I could feel them in the walls, in the air, in the space around me. Shadows seemed to pulse along with the whispers, stretching long and thin, then collapsing back into nothing. I didn't sleep that night. I only waited for dawn, heart hammering, muscles tensed for flight. When the first light of morning cut through the trees, I wasted no time. I grabbed my bag and ran, tripping over roots, my breath sharp in the cold morning air. I glanced back once. The cabin sat silently among the pines, its windows dark and empty, yet I could swear I saw figures just beyond the broken frames, watching. They didn't move, didn't come for me. They just lingered. And I knew then that the stories were true, that something remained in that hollow shell, something patient, waiting, perhaps always waiting. Even now, years later, I can't forget that place. I can't forget the smell of rotten dust, the diary with its last frantic scrawl, the cold whispers and the pacing above me. I avoid that part of the forest now, but in quiet moments, when the wind bends through the trees just right, I swear I can hear the cabin calling, a hollow echo of something long lost and never found. Even after all this time, the image of shadowed figures lingering near the cabin refuses to leave me. And I know, deep down, that no matter how far I drive, how many roads I take, the hollow waits. It waits quietly, but with certainty, holding something I'll never understand, something that thrives in the silence between the trees. The memory is a weight I carry, a story I can't fully shake, a place where the line between reality and the quiet terror of the unknown blurs until you're not sure you ever left at all. I'd been hiking near Cedar Ridge late in the afternoon, the kind of winter day where the sky presses down low and the cold seeps into your bones before you even notice it. The trail was barely visible beneath the fresh snow, and the pines around me groaned under the weight of the frost. I wasn't expecting to find anything out of the ordinary, just some quiet solitude and the sharp bite of the wind. But then I saw it, half buried under a curtain of snow, a small shack that seemed to lean into itself, roof sagging as if weary from decades of snowstorms. Smoke curled lazily from a rusted chimney, thin and gray, dissolving into the overcast sky. At first, I thought it must be occupied, someone taking shelter from the cold, but the silence around it was almost unnatural, so deep it pressed against my ears. I approached cautiously, boots crunching in the snow, every instinct telling me to turn back, yet something, curiosity or perhaps a sense of inevitability, drew me forward. The door hung crooked on its hinges. I reached out and pushed, and the cold air from inside swept over me like a living thing. The interior was frozen in time. A thick layer of frost coated the floor, glinting dimly in the weak light that filtered through the small, grimy windows. A table sat in the center of the room, dishes still set, chairs pushed back as if someone had risen abruptly and vanished. The air smelled faintly of smoke and mildew, a strange combination that made my stomach twist. I felt the silence keenly, as if it were watching me, aware of my intrusion. Then I noticed the footprints. Bare, small, pressed into the thin layer of frost and snow that had drifted across the floor. They led nowhere and everywhere at once, circling the table, vanishing into corners where shadows pooled unnaturally. My pulse quickened. It felt like someone or something had been here very recently, yet the snow outside suggested the ridge had not been touched for days. I moved slowly, careful not to disturb anything, my breath fogging in the frigid air. Each step seemed louder than it should have been, echoing against the frost-covered walls. And all the while, I had the creeping sensation that eyes, invisible but intent, were tracking my every movement. I wanted to call out to break the tension with sound, but my voice caught in my throat. Night fell fast in the winter woods, and with it came a wind that carried whispers, soft but urgent, threading through the cracks in the walls. I couldn't make out the language if it was a language at all, but it felt like a warning, or maybe a plea. The wind rattled the windows and the door, but I sensed the whispers weren't coming entirely from outside. They were inside, curling around me, brushing against my ears, compelling me to move, to leave, yet binding me with a kind of frozen inertia. I tried to retrace my steps to the trail, but the ridge had shifted somehow. Paths I had passed earlier twisted unnaturally, snow-covered rocks appearing where there had been none, trees angling differently, shadows deepening unnaturally. I was disoriented, trapped between the ridge and the shack, and the whispers grew louder, almost urgent now, pressing against my mind. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell. I crouched near the table, tracing the footprints, trying to convince myself they were a trick of the light or my imagination. I even dared to touch a dish, and the coldness of it burned through my glove, searing into memory. I realized then that this shack was not merely abandoned. It was waiting. It had held itself in frozen stillness, preserving a moment that should have passed decades ago, and whatever had left the footprints was patient, observing me, allowing me to wander within its frozen grip. By dawn, the ridge finally shifted back to something recognizable, and I stumbled out of the shack, heart hammering, the whispers fading into the morning wind. I kept my eyes on the trail, running when I could, slipping and scraping my hands and legs on snow-laden branches, desperate to put distance between myself and that place. But even as I reached the safety of the lower trails, the image remained. The frost-coated floor, the chairs pushed back, the footprints that led nowhere yet everywhere, and the impossible sensation of being watched. I never returned to Cedar Ridge, but I still feel it in quiet moments. When the wind presses against the windows of my cabin, I half expect whispers to drift through the cracks. When I walk along unfamiliar trails, I catch shadows that seem too deliberate, movements that vanish when I focus on them. And sometimes, in the dead of winter, when the world is white and still, I see that shack in my mind, smoke curling from the rusted chimney, doors ajar, waiting as it always has, patient, unyielding, and cold. It isn't just a memory. It's a weight I carry, a story I know I cannot fully tell, a place where the line between the living and the frozen, the real and the impossible, blurs into something that refuses to let go. I was making my usual supply run for a friend who lived near the edges of hollow pines, taking the old back roads that twisted through the forest. It was late afternoon, and the light was already thinning, casting long shadows between the pines. The further I drove, the more the forest seemed to close in around me, branches brushing the car roof and the snow-dusted underbrush crunching under my tires. I had been through these woods countless times, but that day felt different, as if something had shifted while I wasn't looking. Somewhere ahead, a faint glow flickered through the trees. At first, I thought it was a campfire, maybe someone lost or out after dark, but as I drew closer, I realized it was a lantern, swinging gently on the porch of a small cabin that I had never seen before. Something in me froze at the sight. The lantern's light was steady but almost alive, casting elongated shadows that stretched unnaturally into the woods. I thought I should turn back, tell myself it was someone's home, that curiosity wasn't worth the risk, but my feet moved before my mind could catch up. The air grew colder, the shadows darker, and the forest around the cabin seemed unervingly silent. Not a bird, not a squirrel, not even the whisper of the wind. I stepped onto the creaking wooden porch, every plank groaning beneath me. The door stood slightly open, just enough to let in the glow of the lantern. I told myself it might be someone inside needing help. I pushed the door, and the cold air inside hit me like a fist. The cabin smelled faintly of smoke and decay, a mixture of damp wood and something older, something that had soaked into the walls over decades. The lantern swung gently in a corner as if guided by some invisible hand, and shadows pooled around the furniture in ways that made my stomach knot. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, yet I stepped inside, compelled by a mixture of fear and fascination. The floorboards creaked beneath me, and the shadows seemed to shift as I moved, like the room itself was breathing, rearranging itself just out of sync with the laws of reality. I felt eyes on me, though I couldn't see anyone. The corners were impossibly dark, and I could almost make out shapes moving just beyond vision. The lantern light flickered once, twice, and suddenly I was certain something was observing me from the far side of the room, its attention deliberate, patient. I whispered to myself that it was just my imagination, that long hours in the forest had played tricks on my mind, but the weight of being watched pressed down so heavily I could barely breathe. I backed toward the door, planning my escape, when a sound came from the loft above me, a soft, deliberate shuffle. It wasn't fast, not a sudden jump, but measured, like someone pacing, counting. My hands clenched into fists, but my legs refused to move. The lantern swung again, and I could swear it tilted toward the shadows, pointing me toward them. I wanted to leave, to run, but the moment felt suspended, and the cabin seemed to hold me in place, as if testing my resolve, gauging how much fear I could bear. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed, and the forest beyond the windows remained silent. Every noise inside the cabin was amplified. The soft creak of the ceiling beam, the whisper of my own breath, the shuffle above me. I didn't dare make a sound, for fear of confirming whatever presence lingered there. The loft seemed impossibly high, the shadows pooling darker and thicker with each passing heartbeat. I eventually forced myself to turn and step toward the door, careful not to break the fragile, eerie balance of the cabin. When I reached the porch, the lantern's light seemed to dim, and the shadows receded into the corners, leaving the room hollow and still. I stumbled back into the forest, branches scratching my face, roots snagging my boots, desperate to put distance between me and that place. I dared a glance back, and the cabin sat silently among the trees, the lantern now just a faint flicker. But I knew, even then, that I hadn't left it behind. That cabin, with its shadows and its watchful presence, had marked me. Even now, I think about that night when I walk through hollow pines. When the wind is right and the trees press close, I half expect to see that lantern, swaying gently, beckoning me back, shadows pooling unnaturally at its edges. I wonder who or what lives in that cabin, or if it's even inhabited at all. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can see the room rearranging itself, shifting in ways that don't make sense, shadows dancing just at the edge of light, waiting for someone foolish enough to step inside again. I was visiting my cousin's property late in the fall, the kind of time when the sun dips behind the ridges early and the wind carries a sharp bite through the hollows. He'd warned me about the old smokehouse behind his house, said it hadn't been used in decades, that the roof sagged and the boards creaked under the weight of time. I didn't pay it much mind at first, thinking it was just an old building, a relic of simpler days. But curiosity has a way of burrowing into you, and I found myself wandering back there one evening, flashlight in hand, more to see than to do. The smokehouse was half hidden behind overgrown brambles and scrub, its door hanging crooked on rusted hinges. The air around it felt heavier, like the forest was holding its breath, and I had the strange sensation that I wasn't entirely welcome. I circled it carefully, noting how the wood was cracked and gray, how the roof sagged so much that I expected it to cave under its own weight. There was a faint smell of old smoke and something earthy, damp and sour. I ran my fingers along the rough boards, and the chill from the wood seeped into my bones. The forest behind me fell silent as I lingered there. It was the kind of silence that presses against your ears, that makes the smallest sound feel deafening. I couldn't explain why, but I felt watched. That night, I stayed in the main house, trying to convince myself that my unease was just imagination. I was curled up on the couch, listening to the wind rattle the windows, when I first heard them. Slow, deliberate footsteps pacing above me. At first, I thought my cousin had come upstairs, but the sound didn't match any movement I knew, didn't belong to the floorboards in the rooms above. The steps were heavy and methodical, one after another, each echoing with a quiet authority. I froze, heart hammering, straining to catch any other sound. The footsteps circled, paused, then resumed, pacing as if someone was tracing a careful pattern. I tried to dismiss it, to tell myself it was the house settling, that old timbers and uneven floors make strange noises. But the sound was too precise, too patient. It wasn't random. Then came the scratching, faint at first, like claws dragging across the boards, slowly circling. My mind raced. I thought of animals, maybe a raccoon or something worse. But the noises were upstairs, where nothing should have been. I dared not move, afraid of confirming whatever presence was there. Each time I thought the sound had stopped, it would resume, deliberate and unyielding. Hours passed like days. I didn't sleep. Every creak, every groan of the house seemed magnified, drawing my attention to corners and shadows where nothing should have existed. By morning, the sun filtered weakly through the windows, and the sound ceased, leaving only the residual feeling that something had been watching me all night, circling above, patient and unrelenting. I went outside to inspect the smokehouse in daylight, but it looked as though nothing had occurred. The boards were still gray, the door still crooked, the brambles unchanged. There was no sign of footprints or movement, nothing to explain the pounding in my chest or the icy grip that lingered in my stomach. Even now I think back to that night. The memory of those footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing in the empty space above me, haunts me more than anything I've ever seen in the woods. I sometimes wonder if the smokehouse itself was alive in some way, or if it simply held the memory of long-past events, replaying them to anyone foolish enough to linger. I avoid that property now, but the sound lingers in my mind. I can hear it in the quiet moments, faint and patient, pacing above the floorboards of old houses, reminding me that some places keep watch long after we've left, and that the Appalachian woods hold secrets better left undisturbed. I had taken a shortcut through Black Hollow one late afternoon, hoping to shave some time off the long drive through the winding forest roads. The light was dimming fast, the kind of evening when shadows stretch unnaturally, blending tree trunks into shapes that aren't really there. That's when I saw the gate. Rusted iron, leaning at a strange angle, half buried in the overgrowth. It looked like it hadn't been used in decades, yet there was a weight to it, an almost magnetic pull that made my chest tighten and my pace slow. Beyond it, tucked against the incline of the hollow, crouched a cabin I had never noticed before, low and squat, its roof sagging, windows darkened by years of grime. I should have kept walking, should have ignored it, but some unexplainable curiosity urged me forward. The air grew colder as I approached. I thought it was just the evening chill, but it pressed differently, heavier, almost tangible. I stepped through the gate, its hinges groaning under the motion, and my boots sank into snow-dusted leaves and soft earth. The cabin's walls were warped, wood splitting along the seams, and a strange odor wafted out. Smoke long gone, or maybe something fouler, earthy and sour. I circled the cabin slowly, noting details that didn't add up. The board shifted subtly in the shadows. Furniture inside appeared moved even though no one had entered for years. The door was ajar, and when I leaned closer to peer inside, the darkness seemed to pulse, like the room itself was breathing, rearranging, just out of sync with the outside world. I stepped inside, cautious, boots scraping on the floorboards. The air was damp, heavy with dust, and a thick layer of frost covered the windowsills. The furniture looked as if it had been recently disturbed. Chairs were slightly out of place, a small table tilted just enough to suggest recent use. I froze, staring at a line of marks on the floor that could have been footprints, but they weren't quite right. Too small, too light, then vanishing in directions that made no sense. A creeping dread wrapped around me as I realized I wasn't alone. There was something here, or at least something that had been, and it had been waiting. I tried to leave, retracing my steps toward the gate, but the hollow around me shifted, or maybe I had shifted, and suddenly the path back seemed different, unfamiliar. Trees blocked the trail, branches angled wrong, roots appearing where there had been none. I stumbled outside, heart hammering, and when I looked back, the cabin crouched silently among the trees, windows dark, its presence like a wound in the forest. But the gate, leaning, rusted, patient, seemed almost alive. I couldn't shake the feeling it had claimed a piece of me the moment I stepped past it, that even leaving didn't mean I'd truly escaped. Even now, years later, I think of that gate. When I drive along old roads or walk through overgrown trails, I see it in the corner of my mind, the iron bars leaning at an impossible angle, the hollow behind it waiting. And I wonder what still lingers inside that cabin. Echoes of past lives, shadows that remember the shape of those who come too close. The memory is a weight I carry, a quiet terror I can't shake, because some places, like Black Hollow, don't forgive curiosity. They simply wait, patient, silent, and unyielding. I had been walking along an old creek path just outside my hometown, a trail I thought I knew well. It was early winter, and the water ran thin and cold, sliding over rocks that glistened like glass in the pale sunlight. The air was sharp, carrying the smell of wet leaves and decayed wood, and the trees leaned close, their skeletal branches scratching at the sky. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, just a quiet afternoon to clear my mind. But somewhere along the path, something shifted. The world around me grew heavier, and the familiar sound of the creek felt muffled, almost swallowed by the stillness. That's when I saw the cabin. At first, I thought it was abandoned, tucked behind a cluster of pines, its wood dark and weathered, windows broken, roof sagging. I paused, unsure why it had never caught my attention before. The forest around it felt wrong, too quiet. Not the ordinary hush of the woods, but a silence that pressed in, heavy and almost sentient. I stepped closer, boots crunching over frost-covered leaves, and the air seemed to tighten around me. Something about the place drew me in, though a small, insistent part of my mind begged me to turn back. The interior of the cabin was worse than I could have imagined. Broken furniture lay scattered, dust thick enough to coat my gloves, and the smell, something sour, metallic, and old, made my stomach twist. I moved slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and that's when I heard it. Faint whispers, barely audible, curling around me, rising and falling like the current of the creek just outside. At first, I thought it was the wind, or the trees shifting, but the voices were distinct, deliberate. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, syllables that felt urgent and insistent, carrying my name at times. My pulse spiked, heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to leave, to flee, but every time I turned toward the door, The shadows seemed to stretch, curling toward me, slowing me down. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. I couldn't tell. Every step I took made the whispers louder, more pressing, as if the cabin itself were alive, pressing me toward some invisible center. I saw movement in the corners, shapes too quick to identify, too subtle to be human. I stumbled toward the creek outside, desperate to escape, but the path had shifted. Trees leaned in impossible ways. Rocks appeared where I knew the ground had been clear. The whispers followed, floating on the cold wind, circling around me, carrying that urgent insistence I couldn't ignore. I finally made it back to the main trail, my legs shaking, lungs burning. The cabin was gone when I looked back, or perhaps the light had shifted, obscuring it, but I knew it hadn't moved. It had claimed something from me, a fragment of awareness that lingered long after I left. Even now, years later, I can hear those whispers when I walk along quiet streams, especially in winter, when the trees bend close and the wind carries the water's murmur. They are faint, almost at the edge of hearing, but unmistakable. They remind me that some places hold memory, that the woods themselves remember who trespasses, and that there are corners of the Appalachians where the line between the real and the impossible is thinner than it should ever be. I avoid that path now, but the memory lingers. I can feel it in the chill of the wind, in the restless murmur of streams, in the way shadows cling too long to the edges of vision. That creek, that cabin, those whispers, they are not gone. And I know, deep down, that even if I never return, a part of me will always be listening, forever attuned to the quiet insistence of the cold, watching woods. I was hiking deep into the Appalachians on a crisp late autumn afternoon, seeking a trail I hadn't explored before. The forest was quiet, too quiet, with only the crunch of leaves beneath my boots to mark my presence. The further I went, the more the trees thickened, their gnarled branches twisting overhead, filtering the fading sunlight into thin, sharp beams. That's when I stumbled across it, a cabin low and squat, tucked into a shallow hollow, almost hidden by fallen leaves and twisted roots. Its log door was thick, solid, and looked as though it had never been opened in decades. I paused, heart tightening in my chest. There was something about it that felt deliberate, like it wasn't meant to be found. Curiosity gnawed at me, though a small voice inside whispered to turn back. I approached slowly, my boots stirring the littered forest floor. The door had a faint gap at its base, and I could see the dim interior, shadows pooling just beyond reach of the weak sunlight. I placed my hand on the rough wood, cold and dry, and pushed gently. The door swung open with a low groan that seemed far too loud for such a small space, and I stepped inside cautiously. The cabin was dark, colder than the outside air, smelling of mildew, old smoke, and something that didn't belong. At first, it seemed empty. Furniture sat as though it had been abandoned mid-use, a chair pushed back from the table, a kettle overturned near the hearth, dust thick on the floorboards. But then I noticed the shadows. They didn't belong to me, nor did they conform to the shapes of the furniture or the cabin itself. They pooled in the corners, stretched along the walls, and seemed to move subtly when I blinked, shifting ever so slightly out of sync with reality. My stomach churned as I realized that no matter where I looked, the shadows retreated just out of focus, always watching, always aware. I dared to take a step further in, and the air seemed to press closer around me. A floorboard creaked somewhere behind, though I was sure I had not moved near it. My pulse quickened, every nerve in my body screaming, yet I couldn't turn away. It was as if the cabin itself held me there, tethered to its walls, to its shadows, to something unseen. I wanted to call out to announce my presence, but my voice caught in my throat. Every instinct screamed to flee, but my feet felt heavier than the earth beneath them, as if the room had some unseen gravity. Time passed in slow, unbearable stretches. The shadows continued to shift subtly, as though alive, rearranging themselves in patterns I couldn't decipher. I could feel them pressing against my peripheral vision, following every movement, every hesitant breath. When I finally forced myself to back toward the door, the shadows recoiled slightly, almost in acknowledgement, and I realized I had not been alone, not even for a moment. Something had been aware of me, patient, waiting, observing, yet never revealing itself fully. When I stepped back into the sunlight, the forest felt impossibly bright and normal. The cabin crouched silently among the trees, log door thick and impenetrable, almost daring me to return. I kept my eyes on it until it disappeared from view, yet even now when I close my eyes I can see the interior, the shadows shifting just beyond my perception. The memory has haunted me ever since, the weight of being watched pressing at the edges of my mind. I avoid that trail now, avoid even thinking about it for long stretches, but in quiet moments, when the wind moves through the pines or shadows gather beneath the forest canopy, I feel its presence again, patient and unyielding. Somewhere beyond that thick log door, the shadows wait. They do not move or strike, they simply observe. And I know, deep down, that no matter how far I go, no matter how much time passes, they are still there, waiting for the next curious soul to wander too close, into the dark corners where the forest keeps its secrets and the line between what is real and what watches you thins to nearly nothing.